Hi everyone. So let's talk about the third dashboard in SQL Monitor Infra. This particular dashboard is very special. Reason being, in this dashboard we are exposing all the Perfmon metrics which have been suggested in this Quest software Perfmon poster. So if you go to my GitHub repository and if you browse to the section where it says live dashboard Perfmon counters Quest software, then there is this link which will lead you to the poster created for Perfmon counters. This poster was created by lot of SQL Server entities. So let me show you by zooming in. Oh, it seems I can't zoom in, so let me download this. I have downloaded this, so let me open it on my desktop now as usual, as a usual PDF. So it has opened. There am I. There we go. So you can see, first of all, this PDF is very long and it was written by lot of MVPs. For example, Kevin Klein, Brent Ozar, okay, Christian Bolton, Bob Ward. So these people, they sat down and they worked on this Perfmon poster. So idea here was that to have a baseline, to have a guidance of what per each Perfmon counter mean for SQL Server DBAs or SQL Server Professional, and what exact values that we should look for in those Perfmon counters. For example, whenever I am troubleshooting something at the for memory at operating system level, then I want to look for these values, these Perfmon counters. If I am troubleshooting something for CPU, then I want to look for Perfmon counters which are mentioned here, and these are the expected values for those Perfmon counters. Similarly, we have various categories or Perfmon objects that have been described here, and the possible values that we want. So this particular PDF is really very large, but it's really awesome. And the idea for this third dashboard was to collect all these metrics which have been mentioned on this Quest software Perfmon counters poster. Now, I have tried to put all the descriptions in the Perfmon counters, all the descriptions for each and every Perfmon counters on the dashboard. So let's start. First, go to that folder and look for that third dashboard. So let me close all the remaining dashboards which are already open. There we go. So the dashboard which we are talking about is this third one, monitoring Perfmon counters Quest software distributed. As usual, let's select our server of interest, that is SQL practice. For now, I am going to change the duration to last 4 hours. So here instead of 3, I am going to make it 4. So let's start with the first row. So we have so many rows in this counter because in the Perfmon poster, so many counters have been mentioned here. So I have tried to incorporate or capture all of these counters in our SQL Monitor infra. That's why we have so many rows here. Within each row, we might see sometimes multiple panels and sometimes single panel also. So let's start with this first row, which is for CPU and processor information. Some key points here in this header. So apart from the CPU and processor keywords, you can see the server, fully qualified domain name of the server, IP of the server, and then you can see host / the service name, SQL Server service name. Then you see a date. This date indicates that what is the latest snapshot for Perfmon counters that we have in our baselining. So the latest snapshot that we have is of this particular time frame. Right now it is 11:15 while I am recording this video, and you can see the latest snapshot that we have is of 11:40, so pretty much 1 minute old. That's all. Now you can see here, sometime back I was running a workload on my SQL practice machine. So the CPU on that box, both OS and SQL Server CPU, was literally very high. There you can see it was on average above 70%. Once I stopped my workload around 10:20 p.m., then the CPU went back to normal state. So the first in the first row we have two panels. The first one is percent processor time, which will give you OS and SQL Server CPU utilization. This second one gives us the processor queue length, how it looks like. So with this you would come to know how the general workload looks like for a processor on the server. The second row is for memory related metrics. So in the second row we have around 3 panels. The first panel is for available M bytes at the operating system level. The second one is for input pages per second and pages per second. And the third one is page file usage on the server. Now, if we don't understand what these Perfmon metrics mean, Perfmon counters mean, then you can bring your mouse here on this eye and you might get the pop-up explaining what this Perfmon counter represents and what is the expected value here. Similarly, you can see what this pages input per second and pages per second mean for this second panel. So the second panel will give you basic information regarding the memory at operating system level. The third one is access methods, which third one exposes the counters which come from access methods from within SQL Server. For example, what is the general workload looks like? That means the speed of the server looks like on your box. So we measure that with batch request per second. Similarly, you will see another panel which exposes all other access methods. For example, how the forwarded records per second looks like on your server. So on my server, every table is a cluster. On each database, the tables are clustered tables or having clustered indexes. That's why the forwarded records are always 0 on my box. But this might be different value on your server. Then you see full scans, index searches, page splits, and all those access methods that are exposed by SQL Server and are relevant to us. Again, as usual, if you want to understand what these mean, you simply bring your mouse here and you will see what these mean and what is the expected value. Talking about the fourth row, which tells us the memory related counters which are coming from within SQL Server. So while I was running my workload, initially I was running a workload which was CPU intensive, but for approximately 10 to 15 minutes I ran a workload which was highly memory intensive. So you can see the memory grant spending was 0 for most of the time, but when I started a workload which was memory hungry, then we started seeing the memory grant spending here. Similarly, if you want to see how the memory utilization looks like from within SQL Server on your SQL Server instance, then you can compare the values of total server memory and target server memory. Again, as usual, what these Perfmon counters mean, if you want to check that, you can bring your mouse here and you will see those the explanation for those Perfmon counters. On my server, the maximum memory that I have allocated for this SQL Server instance is 26 GB. So target server memory is 26 GB and out of that 26 GB, SQL Server is consuming all that 26. That's why you see those two values exactly equal. The next row is all about Perfmon counters on the logical disk level. So this also includes mounted volumes on your server. So the first panel in this row of logical disk is all about disk queue length. The second panel is all about logical disk latency. So if I go deep inside this panel, here is how the disk latency looks like on my box. So I have kept the data files for my databases in eData, log files in eLog, and system databases are going into this particular mounted volume, eMSSQL 15.MSSQL server. TempDB in my on my box are going into eTempDB, and similarly backups are going into these backup volumes, mounted volumes. So you can see these many line items appearing here. These many legends are appearing in this panel. And here you can, if you want to look for any particular mounted volume or disk drive, you can simply click there to see its latency. For example, if I am interested in write latency for my for the drive where my data files are going, so that is eData seconds per write. So this is how the latency looks like on my server on the drive which is hosting the data file. Usually on average you can see it is below 20 milliseconds, so I am not worried at all. And then finally we have this logical disk throughput. So whenever you are analyzing the latency at the disk level, then you have to look for all these three types of counters, that is disk queue length, latency, and throughput. If you are getting the if your disk is reaching to the upper limit of the throughput, then probably you need to divide the workload, divide the database files into different volumes. If you are not reaching the throughput, still you are getting the disk latency, then you might need to work on performing the index tuning or query tuning. So that was the fifth row, all about logical disk counters. Then we have sixth row explaining all the counters regarding the physical disk level. So if you have a local SSDs, in those cases you should check this particular panel. Otherwise this particular row and all the panels within this row will expose almost the same information as the logical disk Perfmon counters. There is not much difference between these two. Talking about network interface counters, so in this row there is a single panel explaining the network throughput that you are getting from each network adapter. So on my box I have three network adapters. These are all virtual because the entire server is a virtual machine, and you can see the throughput that I am getting from each network adapter. The next row has couple of panels, and in these panels we are displaying or exposing how the space utilization looks like for database files and log files for each user database, even the system databases except for resource database and I think master database. So there you can see I am getting log file usage for TempDB, user databases, and then MSDB database. So if I talk about the TempDB, if I click on just the TempDB, this is how the log file size looks like, and this is the total log file size, not used log file size. So for what this means is, it could be that I have given an initial size of 10 GB to my 10 dB log file, but the workload on my server is not that 10 dB intensive. So it might happen that the 10 dB is utilized only to 20 to 30% of that. So this particular first panel exposes both information, total and used. So there you can see now I get both the total and used log file size for 10 dB. So total is around 10 GB, and this is how the used log file size looks like for 10 dB. The next panel in the same row exposes the data file usage. Here we are not worried about used versus total. For the data files, we are only looking for the total size. So for the total size for 10 dB is 40 GB on my server. Moving on to next row, we have counters representing other Perfmon related to databases, other counters related to databases. So for example, how the log bytes flushed per second looks like for each database, how much time it takes for each log flushes on average, and what the percent used look like for the log file. So again, if you want to understand what the usual value, what is the desired value for each of these counters, bring your mouse on this eye and you will understand what these Perfmon counters are and what is the expected value. Next one is the basic information regarding the statistics on the SQL server, and you can simply again bring your mouse here and read about them. This one is one of the important dashboards. So from this particular row, which exposes the buffer memory and memory related Perfmon counters, you can see a couple of key Perfmon counters to evaluate whether your server is having some kind of memory pressure or not. So the first panel is showing you simply the workload, how the workload looks like on your server. The second panel shows you how the phase life expectancy looks like on your server, and the third one is showing you how the input outputs and any event within SQL Server that deals with the data pages, how they are behaving. All those counters you get in this third panel here. For example, what is the rate of lazy writes per second? What is the how many pages we are bringing from disk into memory? Okay, so all those things you can see here. Then this third dashboard exposes you basic information regarding SQL Server memory from within SQL Server. So total server memory versus target server memory, and how many inside the buffer pool, how much is being used for caching the database pages. Same thing you can but in more granularity you can visualize the same information from here, this second panel. So how much is the free memory in KB within SQL Server buffer pool? Similarly, how much is the being used for ad hoc queries and for cache plans or for stored procs? So you can browse these memory Perfmon counters values here in this panel. Then this particular row, which is all about workload performance counters, tells you how the workload looks like and the basic metrics regarding those regarding your workload. So for example, what is the general workload? As we already saw, batch request per second, but out of whatever batch request per second is there on your server, what is the what is the value for SQL compilations and simply and recompilations. You can compare all these three things in a single panel to see whether you need to parameterize your queries or not. Similarly, regarding cursors and errors, you can see the values here, and then specific errors that you want to visualize, that is the third panel. If there are any deprecated features being used in SQL Server, you can see them in the fourth panel. Now the next row, which is all about plan cache Perfmon counters. You can see how the plan cache is being utilized on your SQL Server box. So how many plans are there for ad hoc queries, how many plans are there for stored procs and functions, and similar kind of Perfmon counters. You can see them here in this particular panel, in these panels inside this row. Now there might be situations where somebody opened a transaction on your server and they forgot to close the transaction and they went away. In those cases, you want to keep an eye on how the transaction metrics look like on your server. So this first panel in this row exposes the information what is the longest running transaction. This second one exposes how the free space looks like within your TempDB database. This third one exposes how many transactions are running on your SQL Server box. And the final one is showing you the utilization for version store feature of TempDB. This next row, which is saying SQL Server general statistics, is usually regarding the SQL Server connections and WinSock rejections on the SQL Server instance. So right now there are no WinSock rejections on my box, but there might be a situation where where sessions are coming on your box, SQL Server box or SQL Server instance, but SQL Server is not processing those those new incoming connections at the same rate, and in those cases you might reach to a situation where you reach the upper limit of allowed SQL Server connections through the same TCP socket. So the operating system might reject the new incoming connections. In those cases, you will see WinSock rejections going above 0. And then you see login, logout statistics in this next panel. Here in this row, you will see couple of panels exposing how the lock related metrics look like on your server. So for example, what are the kind of objects on which, what is the kind of resource on which we are having maximum kind of locks. So whether it is a key level lock, object level lock, metadata or allocation unit lock. So you can see different kind of data in different panels within this row, and all of them are related to locks. The next row exposes almost similar information but for latches. Since latches are lightweight lock mechanisms which happen only in memory, so in those cases we don't have differentiation in different types of resources when it comes to latches. So that's why we don't have different resources here in the legend. And finally, you get rows for replication, jobs, database mirroring, and resource pool. These 4 are yet to be worked upon. They might appear, they might have resources or panels in near future, but right now they are empty. So thanks friends for connecting. Have a nice day.